He sat on the edge of his bed, his shoulders slumped under the weight of an unbearable burden. His hands trembled as he gazed into the void, a darkness that seemed to consume his very soul. Everything he had ever built, every ounce of effort poured into his life's work, lay in ruins. The house that once stood as his haven, his sanctuary, reduced to rubble. The career he had sacrificed so much for, the years of dedication and sweat, taken away in the blink of an eye. His health, once a source of pride, was failing, leaving him weaker with each passing day. But none of it compared to the agony that tore through his spirit, an invisible torment that words could never capture. With a ragged breath, he clenched his fists, his voice breaking as he cried out into the suffocating silence. "Why, God, why me?" No answer came. The days blurred together, their heavy monotony pressing against him like a vice. Weeks gave way to months, each moment dragging on with the oppressive weight of hopelessness. He prayed, pouring his heart out in desperation, but every word seemed to bounce back lifeless, as though the heavens had turned their face from him. One evening, when the storm outside mirrored the turmoil within, his eyes fell upon the tattered Bible his mother had given him long ago. Its edges were frayed, its cover worn, yet it seemed to call to him, offering a sliver of light amidst the shadows. His hands shook as he reached for it, flipping through the pages with trembling fingers, searching for a lifeline. And then he found it. Words that spoke of blessings hidden within suffering, promises of comfort for the brokenhearted, of peace for those who sought it with sincerity. The sentences leapt out at him, cutting through the fog of despair like a beacon of hope. They spoke directly to his wounded spirit. They hit him like a wave, washing over him with undeniable clarity. Blessings were promised to the weak, the mourning, the humble. Comfort awaited those who surrendered their pain, and healing was given to those who trusted. It felt as though Jesus himself was reaching out, reminding him of a truth he had long forgotten. The path of faith was never meant to be easy. True treasures were not of this world but eternal. Tears welled up in his eyes as he closed the Bible, clutching it to his chest. He knelt beside his bed, his body shaking with raw emotion as he prayed aloud for the first time in months. "Lord, I have been blind. I have searched for answers in my own strength in the fleeting comforts of this world. But now I see, you are my strength, you are my refuge." The tears fell freely, but they were not born of despair. They were tears of release, of surrender to a love that had never abandoned him. And in that moment, the crushing weight he had carried for so long began to lift. It was not replaced by sudden joy, but by an unshakable peace, a calmness that spoke of God's enduring presence. The days continued, seemingly unchanged on the surface. His circumstances remained difficult. His problems hadn't magically disappeared, but something profound had shifted within him. He began to pray with newfound sincerity. He no longer begged for deliverance from his struggles, but instead sought understanding. He asked not for an escape, but for a deeper relationship with God, for clarity of purpose. The words of Christ that had once seemed distant and irrelevant now resonated deeply within him. The teachings of love, redemption, and hope filled him with strength he couldn't explain. He saw blessings where he hadn't before. The kindness of strangers who offered help without expecting anything in return, the simple beauty of nature's moments, the radiant warmth of each sunrise. Even amidst pain, there was grace. Most profoundly, he felt God's presence as he had never felt it before. In his darkest hours, that presence whispered to him, "You are not alone." The transformation wasn't instant. There were moments of doubt, days of struggle. He was still human, after all, imperfect and flawed. But his faith grew steadily, a quiet flame that refused to be extinguished. Slowly, his life began to reflect the changes in his heart. He found work, not grand or prestigious, but meaningful and steady. Relationships that had been fractured through bitterness began to mend, nurtured by forgiveness and grace. His health, though far from perfect, improved as he gained the strength to care for himself once more. But the greatest healing occurred in his soul. The wealth he now possessed was not silver or gold. It was faith, hope, and love, treasures far beyond earthly measure. One night, as he knelt in prayer with the stars glittering above, he whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for saving me from myself, for turning my ashes into beauty." The man who once cursed the darkness had become a beacon of light. The journey of faith that had begun in anguish and pain had led him to a profound peace he couldn't have imagined. But his story did not end there. With the renewal of his faith came a newfound purpose. The man who had once doubted God's presence now felt a deep calling to share the hope he had discovered. He reached out to others who were suffering, offering them kindness, prayer, and a listening ear. His scars, once symbols of defeat, became testimonies of God's healing and redemption. He spoke from a place of compassion, his words offering comfort to the brokenhearted. He gave freely, not out of obligation but out of love, a love inspired by the very grace that had saved him. The things he had lost, his home, his career, his health, were restored in unexpected ways. New opportunities arose, not through his striving but through God's unmerited favor. Yet the material blessings were secondary to the joy of fulfilling his new mission. He found wealth not in possessions, but in helping others find peace and hope. His own journey had equipped him with the strength to guide others toward the light. One evening, as he sat by the window and watched the stars, he whispered, "Lord, wherever you lead me, I will follow, because I know now, you were with me even in the darkest hours." And with that prayer, he realized that his journey was far from over. It was just beginning. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still soaked from the storms that had passed. He stepped outside into the crisp morning air, breathing in deeply, feeling a strange new energy stir within him. The sky above was painted in hues of gold and lavender, and though his path forward was uncertain, he felt a profound sense of calm, a peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he allowed himself to pause and appreciate the beauty around him. The sound of birds singing, the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was as if God had opened his eyes to the blessings that had always been there, waiting for him to notice. It was a quiet morning, yet his heart was full. Days turned into weeks. Each morning brought new challenges, but each day also brought new hope. He began to rebuild his life piece by piece. The process was slow, and there were moments when doubt crept in, moments when the weight of his circumstances felt unbearable. But this time he wasn't carrying the burden alone. He leaned on God. Every morning he opened his Bible and let the words wash over him. They weren't just words, they were promises. Promises of love, redemption, and purpose. They reminded him that he was chosen, loved, and guided, even in his darkest hours. But the journey of faith is never without trials. One morning a letter arrived. He recognized the handwriting instantly, his estranged brother S. The sight of it sent a pang of emotion through him, a mix of fear, guilt, and longing. They hadn't spoken in years. The relationship had fractured over anger and pride, and neither of them had reached out to mend it. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a simple note. "I'm sorry I miss you, can we talk?" Tears filled his eyes. The pain of the past came rushing back, but so did a deep yearning for reconciliation. He realized that God was offering him an opportunity, not just to heal his own heart, but to mend a bond that had once been precious. He spent hours in prayer, asking for courage and wisdom. His own pride had kept him from forgiving, but God was calling him to let go of the bitterness and open his heart. That evening he picked up the phone and dialed his brother's number. The conversation was awkward at first, but as they spoke, walls began to crumble. They shared apologies, tears, and memories that reminded them of the bond they once had. By the end of the call, both knew that this was the first step toward healing, not just as brothers, but as children of God. Rebuilding relationships wasn't easy, but he found strength in the teachings of Christ. Forgiveness, humility, love, These were the virtues that guided him now. He began to reach out to others he had distanced himself from. Old friends, former colleagues, even neighbors he had barely spoken to. Some conversations were met with warmth, others required patience. But with every effort he felt God's presence encouraging him to keep going. And something amazing started to happen. The kindness he extended to others began to reflect back onto him. People he had once felt disconnected from became sources of support. His life, which had felt so empty, was slowly filling with relationships rooted in love and compassion. One day, he decided to volunteer at a local shelter. It was a humble place, serving hot meals to those in need and offering temporary refuge to the homeless. At first, he wasn't sure what he could offer. His own resources were limited, and he still felt broken in many ways. But he quickly learned that the most valuable thing he could give was his time and his heart. He listened to the stories of those who came to the shelter. Men, women, children, all facing struggles he couldn't imagine, yet their courage inspired him. He realized that despite everything they endured, they carried hope, and that hope was contagious. He found himself sharing his own story with them, how he had lost everything, how he had questioned God, and how faith had brought him back to life. His words resonated with them, not because he had all the answers, but because he understood their pain. Through his volunteering, he discovered a purpose he hadn't known before. He wasn't just rebuilding his own life. He was helping others find the strength to rebuild theirs. Months passed, and his life continued to change in ways he could never have anticipated. He received an offer for a new job, one that aligned perfectly with his passions and values. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. He took it, grateful for the chance to work in a place where he could make a difference. He reconnected with his church community. The warmth and fellowship he found there reminded him of the importance of being surrounded by believers who could support and uplift him. His health improved steadily. It wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about living with purpose, finding joy in the everyday moments, and trusting that God had a plan for him. But most importantly, his faith grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as he knelt by his bed in prayer, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "Lord," he whispered, "thank you for guiding me, for giving me strength when I had none, for teaching me that your plans are greater than mine." He paused, his voice breaking with emotion. "Wherever you lead me, I will follow." And with those words, he felt a peace unlike anything he had ever known. A peace rooted in surrender, in trust, in love. The man who had once been broken was now a vessel of hope. His scars told a story, not of defeat, but of redemption. He became a light to those around him, sharing the love of Christ not through grand gestures, but through simple acts of kindness and faith. His journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, moments of doubt, and questions he couldn't answer. But he knew one thing for certain. God was with him. Always.